What is going on, guys? We've got week 11 here of the NFL season, and of course, our weekly live stream here. Going to go ahead and get you guys completely prepared for this main slate. We'll talk about some of the injuries, my player pool, and of course, if you guys have any questions at any point, go ahead and put them down in the chat and we'll go over them. So, with that being said, let's start off with a little bit of an injury report here for this week. So first and foremost, Lamar Jackson's probably the man of the hour. At this point, is still a game time decision, but has a very serious virus. It's not COVID. He's already had COVID a few times now, but he's so dehydrated at this point, they're not even sure if he's going to start. So for me, completely taking him out of my player pool at this point, because not only do we not know his status at this point, he's also likely to be limited. I don't expect him to be quite as efficient. Obviously, he's one of the best rushing quarterbacks in the NFL. So a lot of concerns there. You have Marquise Brown on that offense, who's not going to be active. Latavius Murray, who's still a game time decision as well. Same thing with Devin Duvernay. So not just Lamar Jackson, who's banged up for that team. So a lot of question marks pretty much all over the place. Some other guys on the injury report we got to talk about. Jared Goff, not going to play. Jamar Jefferson also out for the Lions. Going to be turning to, it's not David Blau, I forget the guy's name at the top of my head right now. I have him in my projections. It's Tim Boyle, who's going to be starting for them. That's how bad he is. We haven't seen him in quite some time. It's going to be an atrocious game there up in the Lions. So I'm not really targeting anyone on that offense. I was considering TJ Hawkinson at the beginning of the week, but I thought Drew Blau was going to be starting, who was actually all right last year. Tim Boyle, God knows what kind of quarterback this guy is going to be. So a little bit less bullish on somebody like a TJ Hawkinson as a result. On the Packers, we have Aaron Jones, who's not active. A.J. Dillon is going to be the workhorse back there. Allen Lazard, who's also out. That means that we have Randall Cobb playing, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, a few other people like Malik Taylor also in the mix in terms of wide receiver. And of course, it's also important to note, Robert Tonyan obviously suffered that really bad injury a few weeks ago, also out. So we're looking at Mercedes Lewis at tight end, maybe even Josh DeGuara. Overall, receiving core for the Packers getting a little bit thin, which you don't like to see. There's at least going to be some value for us on this slate, though. So we head over to New Orleans. Over there, we have Alvin Kamara, who's not going to be active, was rolled out last night. As a result, people like Mark Ingram going to get a lot of carries. Elijah Mitchell has been ruled out for San Francisco. As a result, we're looking at Jeff Wilson taking a lot of the snaps at running back. Trey Sermon probably being mixed in there. JaMychal Hasty was rolled out, so likely going to be down to those two running backs. Maybe Kyle Juszczyk getting a few carries, but Jeff Wilson Jr. becomes one of my favorite plays in the slate, which we'll get to here in a second with our projections. And keep moving on. Let's get to the last team for the 1 o'clock games. We have the Washington football team. They're dealing with a few injuries to their wide receiver core, most notably with Curtis Samuel, who as of right now is a game time decision, but much closer to doubtful, and Ricky Seals-Jones, who's already been rolled out. We have Logan Thomas, who's still on IR as well. So as a result, John Bates is going to be the starter at tight end, and then you're going to have Sammis Reyes mixed in left and right as well. And I actually went to high school with Sammis, which makes me, I'm definitely playing him just in case, right? He's not going to see much playing time otherwise. He didn't even play football in college, didn't even play in high school for that fact of the matter. He's a basketball player. He's extremely athletic. He's on the team for a pure potential standpoint, right? He's usually on the practice squad. If he gets in the red zone, there's no better guy on the field at high pointing the ball. So maybe he scores a touchdown, that kind of thing. I don't recommend going that way. A little bit more of a sentimental pick for me just because I went to high school with the guy, but definitely at least going to see probably 25 to 30% of snaps. So he's the sleeper of all sleepers, if that makes sense. Got a question down in the chat that I see that we'll cover here. So Tom McDermott says thoughts on Jimmy G, Joe Mixon. So this is a lineup question. So let me go ahead and take a look at it. I'm not going to read it all out loud. Jimmy G at quarterback is probably the only part that I'd be a little bit less bullish on. He's a little bit inconsistent there, right? He's going to get you that 21, 22 point performance left and right, but he's not going to get you 16 to 17 points consistently. So I would have a problem with the quarterback there, especially since you don't have any type of stack. Well, actually, you do. You have Kittle in there as a stack. I would look elsewhere. I would try to spend up for one of those premier level stacks, somebody like a Josh Allen. You could go to somebody like a Dak Prescott. He's my favorite stack on the entire slate. If you wanted to go a little bit cheaper, you have Cam Newton out there. You have Joe Burrow. You have Derek Carr. Derek Carr's probably in that same type of price range as Jimmy G. I like all those options more. So rest of the lineup, though, I like Brandon Cooks. He was in my core plays video. Jalen Waddle, I think he's a little bit higher owned than I'd like, but a really high median projection. So as long as you're differentiating with the rest of your lineup, I think you're not going to go wrong there, to be quite honest with you. Joe Mixon at running back, I like a whole lot. Hunter Renfrow at flex, I like that as well. And of course, the Browns defense against that dumpster fire up in Detroit, I like that as well. So, and you said Ann Bateman, I'm not sure where that would be in your lineup. If you're just asking about him in general, I'm okay about him today, but the issue is Lamar Jackson is likely to be limited. He might not even be starting. And if Lamar Jackson's not active, I hate Rashad Bateman, right? So we're going to have to wait to see on that news there. But hopefully that answers your question. Let's move on with the rest of the injury report, though. Kyler Murray is expected to not play. So we're going to have Colt McCoy likely active. He is questionable himself, but siding towards probable at this point. DeAndre Hopkins also out for that Cardinals team. Amari Cooper is also out for the Cowboys. So that's really it for the late game injuries. Not a whole lot other than that to speak of. But because Amari Cooper's out, we're looking at a lot of snaps for Michael Gallup. And because DeAndre Hopkins is out, obviously Christian Kirk going to see a little bit of a boost in his usage. But in terms of snap share, you're going to get a lot more snaps for people like Rondale Moore and AJ Green. So I get huge boost in my poll to those two players, particularly Rondale Moore. If you guys saw my value plays video, you know I'm really high on him this week. Are guys that, because of the injury situations that open up. So with the injuries out of the way, let's hop right into the projections. Going to go ahead and share my screen here for you guys. Let me bring it up. We're going to start with the quarterbacks, and we'll talk about some of my favorite stacking options for this slate. So on here, you guys can see my Patreon projections. Obviously, if you guys are a part of that page, you already have access to all of this data. On here, I'm updating it throughout the week. Obviously, as more injury news comes out, that kind of thing, making changes left and right. So if you guys want access to that, link will be in the description. But let's hop into these quarterbacks here. You can see that there's quite a few options on this slate that I like. At the top of the board, Josh Allen. I don't think you can go wrong there. It's a very good matchup against this Colts team. Relatively high total game. Good matchup. The guy's a stud. You can't really go wrong there. He also has some good options you can use in terms of stacks. You can go to Stephon Diggs, one of my favorite options at wide receiver. Cole Beasley, Emmanuel Sanders, or my favorite option, Dawson Knox, you can use at tight end. So I'm using quite a few stacks with Josh Allen. As of right now, he's in 22% of my lineups, using at least a 2-player stack with him as well. So going down to Lamar Jackson, we already talked about him. He's definitely a risky proposition today. He's going to be out. Kyler Murray, I also have projected as out, not going to be a play for me. Patrick Mahomes, I don't hate going to him. I just feel like he's a little bit higher owned than he should be. You can see he's the highest projected ownership at quarterback of anybody on the slate here. I'll scroll up so you guys can see the whole player pool there. He's, again, 10.2% ownership, only person in double-digit ownership, and a lot of it's chasing, right? You look at that box score last weekend. You obviously got to see him absolutely carve the Raiders up in prime time, and people want to tail that. And while I think that is a good sign of things to come, he's expensive. All the stacks with Patrick Mahomes are extremely expensive as well. You're talking Tyreek Hill, one of the most expensive wide receivers, over $8,000. Travis Kelce, the most expensive tight end. So the way I'm approaching this game is I'm just trying to take little parts of it that I like. So Travis Kelce, one of my favorite tight ends. I have plenty of Travis Kelce. I also have plenty of Mecole Hardman, who I think is just vastly underpriced on this slate. I think a lot of the attention that Tyreek Hill is going to garner is going to open up Mecole Hardman. So rather than taking Patrick Mahomes, trying to take both of those stud options and stacks, I'm taking the bits and pieces that I like out of this game. Darrell Williams for me is also a fade. I'm taking a stand just that this isn't the side to target, right? On the other side of things, my favorite stack of the week is Dak Prescott. So a lot of my exposure to this game is a Dallas Cowboys stack, taking 2 guys on that offense along with Dak, and then running it back with somebody like a Mecole Hardman, a Travis Kelce, whoever it needs to be from that offense to get that job done. So that's the way I'm approaching that game. It's just the chalkier side is the side that I'm avoiding. And more often than not, when you're playing DFS, if you have 2 quarterbacks that are really close in projection, one is just higher owned than the other, you're going to gain long-term. You're going to have positive EV long-term, taking the guy that's just a little bit lower owned. So that's why I like Dak there. Obviously, in my player pool, one of my favorite stacks on the week. Aaron Rodgers is interesting just because of the injury, right? A lot of people are going to avoid him. You've seen a lot of reports that he's been limited this week, that kind of thing. And to be quite honest with you, a lot of times that's just coach speak. People trying to overblow something, trying to create a little bit of a competitive advantage from the strategy side. I think from a DFS perspective, anytime we're getting Aaron Rodgers from less than 3-4% ownership, he's almost a must play. This guy is clear upside. has been great to this point in the year. He was the MVP last year of the NFL. Going to be one of my favorite plays here on the slate. We have another question down in chat. Tom says, thoughts on Ryan Tannehill? Easy matchup. So yeah, I agree. Easy matchup against the Texans, but that's a two-edged sword in my opinion. Obviously, bad secondary, they're likely to win that game, but that also means they're likely to rely on the run. And if you remember, obviously the Titans, a run-first offense. They've only really started to throw a lot over these last few weeks without Derrick Henry. But now that they have that cupcake matchup on defense, I expect them to return to their actual mold, which is a run-first offense. It's not like I hate Ryan Tannehill here. He's just extremely high owned, right? If he was 4 or 5% owned, let's go ahead and let's see what his ownership is in my projections right here. I'm at 4.7% ownership. If he was completely unowned, like somebody like an Aaron Rodgers, where I could put him in 5-6% of my lineups and get leverage, he'd be a great play. But at nearly 5% ownership, you have to allocate 10 to 15% of your lineups to him to get leverage. And to me, it's just squeezed out of the lineups, right? He's a little bit more expensive than he typically is. Again, he's a little bit higher owned than he would typically be. And I think that matchup could go both ways, right? It's a good matchup, but they could also just run the ball down their throats because it's that easy of a matchup. So I don't hate the play. I don't want to talk you out of it, but just not somebody that's going to be in my player pool. I see the game going a little bit elsewhere. I'm actually targeting those running backs on that team, Deonta Foreman, even Adrian Peterson in a few lineups because they're cheap, and I also expect them to get plenty of carries. Joe Burrow, though, is somebody, if you're going to pivot to anyone, I think Joe Burrow might be the guy for you, though. Somebody who, this is a very high total game against this Raiders team. The Raiders got absolutely torched by the Chiefs. I mean, they're dealing with a lot of injuries. I think that had a lot to do with it, but they're also dealing with scheme problems. Without John Gruden, I mean, just absolutely falling apart left and right, and you can't really blame them. They're dealing with backup head coaches, that kind of thing. Joe Burrow, so he should be in a very good situation here. He's obviously a very high volume passer, has good stacking options on that team. People like T. Higgins. You can go to Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd. For me, I am using plenty of Joe Burrow stacks. He's my second highest owned quarterback. I'm using a lot of Jamar Chase. I'm using a lot of Tyler Boyd. For me, T. Higgins, just completely too highly owned. I mean, right now he's projected for 15.6% ownership. If you guys saw my fades video, you know that he's a fade. It's just, that's ridiculous to me. And he's the number 2 or even number 3 option on that team. So for him to be over 15% ownership, whereas Jamar Chase is single digit ownership, same thing with Tyler Boyd, just is something out of the twilight zone. Doesn't make any sense to me. And those are clear situations where you want to avoid that player that's super high owned and target those guys that are lower owned. Again, more often than not, in terms of EV, you're going to be on the positive side of that. Russell Wilson is my sneaky stack of the week. He's $6,500, which is much cheaper than he should be. He's also somebody who's coming in with much lower ownership than he should. Obviously, had a very bad performance. It was his first week back from that finger injury, though. So not only should he be more healthy this time around, he's going to be a lot more polished because he's had more reps in practice. Last week, didn't practice at all, went out there and played, showed a ton of rust, was not very accurate, which probably had a lot to do with the finger, but also probably due to his level of preparedness, that kind of thing. With all of those positives this time around, I expect improvement. This Cardinals defense has looked really bad these last few weeks. I think a lot of it has to do with the offense kind of putting them in bad positions. Anytime you're going to turn the ball over on offense, your defense is going to be put in a very weak position. So if they end up doing that, Russell Wilson is going to take advantage. And all he has to do at $6,500 as opposed to somebody up here at like $8,000 is he's got to get you like 23 fantasy points, right? Russell Wilson does that 8-10 times a year. So for me, it's a very clear smash spot right there. I believe he's my 4th highest owned quarterback as of right now, especially because he's only 4% owned, right? I don't have to go and allocate 25% of my lineups to him. I can still get plenty of leverage at right around the 16% mark, which is what I have him at right now. Somebody who is getting into my lineups right now is Kirk Cousins. So Kirk Cousins down here at $6,100. I wasn't sure if he was going to fit into my pool earlier on in the day, but he is. I need a few extra quarterbacks on this slate. Love the matchup against this Packers team. It's going to be a relatively high-scoring game as well. And Tom says down in the matchup, he's playing the Minnesota game. It's an easy matchup. Again, Aaron Rodgers is dealing with that injury. I just like the game in general. I think this is going to be a relatively high-scoring game. It's a divisional matchup. 2 offenses that are relatively efficient as well. And Minnesota just loves to score. They love getting into some of these shootouts, some of these sprints. And obviously, that would be extremely advantageous for Davante Adams. For me, I have Aaron Rodgers in my player pool. I'm definitely stacking him up with Davante Adams. I like using A.J. Dillon as well, which we'll get to at the running back position. I love that game overall. I love Justin Jefferson as well. If you guys saw my sleeper picks video, he was my number one sleeper pick of the week. He's sub 4% ownership. He's really expensive, but he also has one of the highest ceilings on the slate. So completely in lockstep with you right there. Kirk Cousins is in my player pool as well. Derek Carr, I had him down as a no. He actually swept into my pool the last time I ran my sim. So that was about 5 minutes before we got on here. A lot of it has to do with the Cincinnati side. We're expecting them to score a lot of points. This Raiders team just leaks points on defense. And what that means is that Derek Carr, just by the nature of how the NFL works, rising tides raise all boats kind of thing. Derek Carr is just going to go off. So I really like that there a lot. $5,900. He's got some decent stacking options. I mean, Darren Waller is a pretty solid option on this slate. You can go to somebody like a Hunter Renfrow, even a Zay Jones, Ryan Edwards as well. All of them are relatively good priced. None of them are smash plays. The only one that I would consider to be a core play would be Darren Waller. But the stacking options are very attractive. Again, a lot of that has to do with the price tag of Derek Carr. Also, just the overall game script of that game in terms of the over-under. Let's move on a little bit towards some of the options down low. This is a dead range, in my opinion, down here. Justin Fields, Jimmy Garoppolo, Tua. I think all of them are a little bit overrated. I don't have them projected very well this week, particularly Tua Tagovailoa. I think he's bad chalk this week, to be quite honest with you. A lot of people are going that way because of this Jets team. And while the Jets are a bad team, right, we expect the Dolphins to come out and win this game. They're the best team against opposing quarterbacks. I think that's what people don't understand. They expect this to be a great matchup, but in reality, it's not. It's the worst matchup in the NFL. So I think people need to get their head around that. It's just because you're a bad team doesn't mean you're letting up a ton of production to opposing quarterbacks. And in fact, being a really, really bad team in the NFL is horrible to target as a quarterback. You're going to be running the ball a lot more against those type of teams, trying to run out the clock. And overall, I think that's a situation where the public has far too much confidence in a guy, and it's somebody that I'm going to be fading. I'm going down to Baker Mayfield. I think he's a fade. He's clearly not healthy. Trey Lance isn't going to see many snaps today. Tyler Heineke, if you wanted to use him as a flyer play, you could go ahead and do so. He's just not in my player pool as of right now. I'm going to go ahead and take him as off a note, just put him as a blank. I don't think he's a horrible play today. Trevor Simeon, he's been very meh to this point. If he was in the $4,000 range, would be a little bit more attractive, but at his price tag, doesn't really give you too much to look forward to. Trevor Lawrence, he made it into a few of my breaks earlier on in the day. He's like an all right projection. The issue is I don't like the matchup against the San Francisco 49ers. 49ers love to run the ball. They love to dominate that time of possession. So Trevor Lawrence, somebody that's a little bit dependent on having that type of volume, going out there, running a ton of plays, might not have the ability to do so in this type of instance. So not really as high on him. Somebody that I like a lot more is Cam Newton. So Cam Newton, obviously, he's the X factor of the week. Matt Rule has come out and said that he's going to take the first snap, but that PJ Walker is likely to still play. So we have no idea what that role is going to look like. I'm still going to have him in my player pool because earlier on in the week, we had him for 15, even 20% projected ownership. And that has fallen to single digits after all of this news. So at just right now, 7.1 expected ownership. That is much lower than what we thought going into the week, which makes him actually a better play, in my opinion. All he has to do is go out there and play 80, 90% of snaps. And most of the time when you have a quarterback in the NFL, they play most of the snaps in a game. There's not really 50-50 splits. This isn't the running back position, right? So PJ Walker, even though he might be active, it might be for some of those third down gadget plays where Cam Newton doesn't know the offense. He doesn't know some of those trick plays or whatnot, and they have to have PJ Walker in there to run them. So we'll have to see. I'm going to be taking the approach early on him. I want to try to buy in early on the guy because if he's running at full strength with these kind of weapons like Christian McCaffrey on that team, watch the heck out. And we're going to finish up with this last quarterback, then we'll hop over to the running back position. So Tyrod Taylor, good matchup against the Tennessee Titans. Tennessee Titans, one of the worst teams against the pass in the entire NFL. They're also a team that lets up a ton of points. We're expecting them to win this game by quite a few points. So Tyrod Taylor going to be having plenty of garbage time production. I don't think you're going wrong there if you play him at all. So we'll go to a question down here in the chat before we hop over to running back. Tom says, DeAndre Swift or Kittle? I'm assuming you mean for flex. For me, that would be George Kittle. I mean, DeAndre Swift, he's dealing with Tim Boyle as quarterback. They're going to get absolutely murdered by the Browns. I would definitely go with Kittle there. A little bit more consistent, still giving you that kind of upside as well. And just because Swift had an amazing game last week, that doesn't mean that's going to happen again. It's a completely different matchup. That Steelers team has been atrocious against the run to this point of the year. So not a surprise that they ran it as much as they did. And I'm saying that as a Steeler fan. I can tell you, I've seen their run defense. The Seattle Seahawks were able to absolutely gash them. So yeah, I think a lot of that was just due to matchup. So yeah, let's hop into the running backs now. So quite a few running backs that I like. Christian McCaffrey is super expensive. So if you end up playing him, even though he has relatively high ownership here at 14.5%, what I've noticed in my builds is that it makes you relatively unique. Something that I just noticed with Christian McCaffrey is whenever you use him, it takes you off of a lot of those really expensive wide receivers. And a lot of the chalk on the slate are the cheap running backs, the really expensive wide receivers. So by taking somebody like Christian McCaffrey, it almost instantly makes you different. I noticed that with my builds. There were builds where I took him out of the player pool. It was very chalky. Was dealing with a lot of expected duplicated lineups. My dupe percentage was like 7.8% expected or something like that. Whereas when I used Christian McCaffrey, it was closer to 1 or even 2%. So it's an interesting debacle. He's one of my favorite plays on the slate. As of right now, I have him in my player pool. A lot of that is just to make my lineups more unique. And Tom has a perfect segue down to the chat. Says, is it bad to have too much ownership in a GPP? Absolutely. And particularly in the NFL, where everything is so volatile and everything is so unpredictable. Sports like golf, sports like football, where you have so much unpredictability in the results, game theory becomes the name of the game. That's how you end up getting an edge when it comes to DFS. Sports that are a little bit more predictable, like the NBA, you want to make sure that you're using your projections. Make sure that you're leaning on the numbers a little bit more. Whereas sports like football, again, golf, you really want to try and take an edge of this ownership, because let me go ahead and find a good example for you here, because I think this is a really good point for everybody down in the chat. So let's find two guys at a close range where I have one as a yes, one as a no, and they're both playing. So let's do this up here. Okay, so we have David Montgomery and Mark Ingram. So Mark Ingram, he was somebody I was considering going into the week. He is actually a no for me right now. This 4.5% ownership, because the Alvin Kamara news came out a little bit late, that's going to be a low number. We're going to expect that to come in probably closer to 12, even 13%. And this David Montgomery number, I think, is pretty accurate. It might come in a little bit higher just because of this news with Lamar Jackson. A lot of people are going to start swapping onto the Bears because there'll be a little bit of a better game script there. But let's talk about this projection difference, right? So we have Mark Ingram down here at 11.9 point projection. We have David Montgomery at a 15.8 point projection. David Montgomery is going to be a little bit more chalky than Mark Ingram, right? We're expecting 14 to 15% ownership on Montgomery if that goes up a little bit. And like I mentioned before, Mark Ingram going to come in closer to 11 or 12%. That's what I have him at as my last sim. I'll be updating this on Patreon right after we get off this video. The point of the fact of the matter is, right, just because David Montgomery has higher ownership doesn't mean we're going to go ahead and fade him. He has a significantly higher projection in terms of points. So it really comes down to making sure you can do that mathematics. There's no clear answer, right? Just because somebody's higher owned doesn't mean we're going to fade them. Let's find a better example of this, right? Where maybe a guy has a higher projection, but he's just projected out of the world in terms of his ownership. So a good example, I mean, DeAndre Swift's a good example. I mean, I know you brought him up here just a second ago, right? I am projected for 15.7 points, which is solid for any position. It's over 2x. The issue with him is he's projected for 7.1% ownership. That at running back, that's relatively high. That puts him on par like people like Joe Mixon. That is an absolute smash spot. People like AJ Dillon are twice as owned, but also come in with a significantly higher projection. I mean, you're looking at what, 2.2x as opposed to 2.9x. That is a significant difference. So it really comes down to making sure you do those calculations. If somebody is chalk and you don't think they're going to have a good day, the clear answer is just fade them. So it gives you a lot of leverage there. It gives you an upper hand over a lot of the field is the short answer there. So with that being said, let's hop into some of these running backs. Dalvin Cook, game script against this Packers team. I'm expecting a shootout. Obviously going to be somebody I have in my player pool. Nick Chubb was a core play of mine. If you guys saw the video earlier on in the week, somebody who has a very good matchup against this Detroit Lions defense. And of course, this team runs the ball more than anybody else. So I'm expecting a very good game from Nick Chubb there. Joe Mixon is somebody who actually made my last player pool. Somebody who, again, I'm using with Joe Burrow. I'm not afraid to use him in stacks there. He's going to see plenty of targets here. This should be a good scoring game, relative shootout. AJ Dillon, he's my highest owned running back on the slate. My second highest owned running back is Jeff Wilson Jr., who we'll get to here in a second. Dillon's going to see 25 touches in this game. And in reality, at $6,000, that's one of the best numbers on the slate. Same thing here with James Conner. He's also one of my favorite plays. I believe he's my third highest owned running back at this point. Good matchup against Seattle. Seattle's been absolutely atrocious against the run. James Conner is essentially this entire offense as well. And while he had a middling week last week, I'd say it's just about average for James Conner. The week before that, he scored 40 fantasy points. So let's not forget about that. The guy has shown his ceiling, particularly without Chase Edmonds in the mix. We have another question down in the chat. Hunter says, shootout between Kansas City and Dallas. That's what I'm expecting, right? I'm expecting right around 55 fantasy points. 55 point over under, that kind of thing. I'm choosing the Cowboys side. That's the side that I'm trying to stack up just because they're cheaper. They're coming in at lower ownership, and I'm running it back with the Chiefs. So yeah, that's a lot of my ownership there. Agree with you there for sure. And you'll see that with some of our options at wide receiver. At running back, I'm not really trying to target like Ezekiel Elliott. I'm not targeting Darrell Williams. I'm trying to get those wide receivers or those tight ends, that kind of thing. So like Dalton Schultz, Travis Kelce, Tyreek Hill, CD Lamb. Amari Cooper's out, by the way, which opens up Michael Gallup, that kind of thing. I love all those plays. They're some of my favorite plays in the slate. We'll get to that right after these running backs. There's actually not very many more running backs that we need to talk about. There's a lot of no's out here, really concentrated at this position. Somebody that I am taking a stand on would be Myles Gaskin here at $5,700. Good matchup against the Jets. And a lot of people are targeting Tua Tagovailoa. I'm targeting Gaskin. He's somebody who's going to get extra targets out of the backfield, also going to get some extra carries because we're expecting them to come out and whoop this Jets team. I like him a lot. I expected him to come in at higher ownership, and as of right now is in the teens in ownership, which isn't bad at all. David Montgomery, we already talked about, should see some extra usage, especially if Lamar Jackson is out, which I haven't been able to double check the news, obviously, since we've been on stream, but I have him projected as out right now. He does not look good in terms of the illness. And even if Lamar plays, that doesn't change my opinion on that offense. I do not want any of that Ravens team. I expect that to be a very ugly game for them, even if he ends up playing. Jeff Wilson Jr., like I said, he's my second highest owned running back. Really like the matchup against the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's going to see 20, 25 touches in this game. At $5,100, he's one of the best plays on the slate. Alex Collins here, also somebody I really like. He's in my main GPP lineup as of right now for like my single entries, that kind of thing. Good matchup against this Cardinals team, particularly if the Cardinals are without Kyler Murray like we expect. Alex Collins and the Seahawks probably going to go out and win the game. So you should see some extra touches, get some extra production due to the game script, that kind of thing. And that's pretty much it at running back, right? I have Devonta Foreman in some lineups. So he actually ended up squeezing into my last player pool right before we got on stream here. A lot of it just comes down to the game script. We expect the Titans to come out and absolutely kill the Texans. And I even have Adrian Peterson. So he's also in my player pool. I believe I had Adrian Peterson in like 2 lineups. So it wasn't like I was going crazy on him or anything. Let's move over to wide receiver. And this is where I'm spending up. This is where I'm spending a majority of my salary this week. There's a ton of stud options at wide receiver that I just absolutely love. And let's hop into them because they deserve a lot of the breath here. They have a lot of the talk. So the top of the board, Davante Adams. Obviously, this is a good matchup in this game. They're expecting a shootout. I just think he's a little bit higher owned than he should be. So I'm going to have right around 20%. So right around what the field has. I'm not really taking a huge stand either way. Tyreek Hill is actually somebody that I'm taking a stand against. He's very chalky. He's almost higher owned than somebody like Davante Adams and somebody who's a lot less consistent. He's more of a boom bust type of player. And if you're playing in a GPP, that's extremely attractive. But I usually try to target him when he's a little bit lower owned. I mean, sometimes we get Tyreek Hill, 6-7% ownership, that kind of thing. That's when he's too irresistible not to play. But I'm going to Justin Jefferson. So I'm taking a huge pivot spot here. This is where I'm getting a lot of my uniqueness in my lineups. Justin Jefferson is I believe he's my highest owned wide receiver. Let me go ahead and double check. So I'm not giving you guys anything that's not true here. He's my highest owned wide receiver on the slate. So a lot of that comes down to just the type of matchup that he has, right? You're dealing with an absolute shootout that's going to be going on in this game. You're also dealing with the fact that this guy is in the most concentrated offense in the NFL. He gets a ton of targets. He scores a ton of touchdowns. Pretty much him, Adam Thielen, Dalvin Cook, and KJ Osborne once in a blue moon gets targets. Just it. Other offenses, you're dealing with 10 to 12 man rotations, 7 to 8 for most teams. Over here, it's a true 4, maybe 5-man rotation at the very most. So anytime we have a shootout, Justin Jefferson is a prime candidate to go off for 35, 40 fantasy points. So I really like going there a whole lot. And he's sub 5% ownership. I mean, guys, he's literally coming in essentially unowned. If this guy was $7,900, if he was $200 cheaper, he would be 15% owned. There's just such a psychological difference between the guys that are in this $7,000 range and then the ones that have an 8 in front of their name. It makes huge differences in terms of ownership. And you can really just leverage that fact alone and probably have a positive return plus EV long-term, just taking advantage of some of those psychological errors. It's why the gas stations put 9-10 cents at the end, that kind of thing, right? It's just trying to take advantage of people's psychology, oversights, that kind of thing, their biases. So Stephon Diggs, right? He's $7,900. Look at his ownership, 14.3%. Enough said. I'm still playing him, still like him on the slate. He was a no for me before. I'm playing too much Josh Allen to avoid him. So we'll put him down as a blank, right? It's like he's just in my player pool. I don't feel one way or another. But look at the difference, guys. 3.1%, 14.3%. It's ridiculous. It's just people are smart, right? We have a lot of smart people in this industry, but people are dumb as fuck sometimes. That's my 2 cents on that, okay? People are dumb as fuck sometimes. Hunter says your channel rocks, man. I appreciate your support here a lot. Thank you for stopping by. Tom says AJ Dillon or Mixon. Oh, man, that's tough. I go AJ Dillon. I think he has a higher floor, similar ceilings for both players, but that's close. That's a close one. Let's keep going through the player pool here a little bit. And sorry for going on the rant there, but it's just so glaring. I mean, 11% difference between these two ownerships. And to be quite honest with you, for the guy that's projected higher is coming in at lower ownership, like, wow. Deebo Samuel, he's way higher owned than he should be as well. It's the same type of situation where he has the 7 next to his name rather than an 8. And even though it's a $200 difference, is seeing way more ownership than he should. The guys down here like AJ Brown, CD Lamb, and Jamar Chase, now this is well warranted. These are guys that could very well be $8,000. I'd be still fine with playing them. AJ Brown going to see a ton of targets without Julio Jones in the lineup. CD Lamb going to see a ton of targets without Amari Cooper in the lineup. And Jamar Chase in one of the highest over-unders on the entire slate. I mean, the guy goes out and gets you 100 yards and a touchdown pretty much every single week. I'd much rather play those guys than the guys up here that are higher owned, more expensive, and frankly come in at a lower projection. So for me at wide receiver, this is why I wanted to talk about it so much. I'm extremely convicted this week. I don't have the biggest player pool. I'm definitely a little bit more condensed than I would be during most weeks. And that's what we got there. Let's keep going down a little bit further down the board. Terry McLaurin is one of my favorite sleeper picks. He's coming in with right around 5% ownership. This is a relatively high over-under game as well. I think it's a little bit of a sneaky game. You know, not a lot of people are talking about this Washington versus Carolina game. And they're dealing with a ton of injuries on offense. You're not going to have Curtis Samuel. You're not going to have either of their tight end options. You're dealing with their practice squad tight ends playing at this point. So Terry McLaurin going to see some extra targets. He's already one of the best fantasy wide receivers in the NFL. And again, he has the 7 next to his name. If he was $100 cheaper and he was $6,900, he would be chalk. He'd be 16, 17% owned. So I try to take advantage of those type of situations, particularly when the guy's projecting well in terms of points. DK Metcalf, he's somebody I'm using with a lot of my Russell Wilson stacks. I like going there. Same thing with Adam Thielen with my Kirk Cousins stacks. DeAndre Hopkins is obviously out. Devonta Smith is a little bit more expensive than I think he should be. Amari Cooper is out. Michael Pittman, more expensive than he should be. You can see this range right here. I absolutely love. There's 5 yeses in a row. So Tyler Lockett, Brandon Cooks, they were on my core plays video. Love both their price tags. Also love the situations that they're in. Just don't really need to go into too much detail there. They're both in really good spots, especially Brandon Cooks against this Tennessee Titans defense. DJ Moore, I've cooled down a little bit on, I'd say over the last maybe 30, 40 minutes. Because of all these solid options we have at wide receiver, he doesn't need to be a priority in my player pool. So maybe not somebody that I'm using as a core play as I was earlier on in the day. Hunter Renfrow and Christian Kirk, obviously with Henry Ruggs out of the way over there for the Raiders, Hunter Renfrow seeing more targets week after week was already a solid option. Very consistent as well. So in cash, he's almost a must play. Kirk going to see some extra targets with Hopkins out of the way as well. So I like that. Jalen Waddle. So this 4.8% ownership right there, I believe is way too low. I have him closer to 13% right now. That's a product of a lot of the recent news. People are just flooding the Tua Tagovailoa for whatever reason. That's why he's a fade for me. So I was kind of anticipating that type of ownership. That's why I already had him down as a no. But in reality, probably coming in with a little bit higher ownership. When I run my next sim after this, it'll probably be closer to that 14% mark. T. Higgins, also one of these players that, again, is going to be higher owned than we have him projected for right here. Everyone in the industry has been talking about him. I've seen him touted by 8 to 10 people in the last 10 to 12 hours. Definitely not going to be in my pool. Emmanuel Sanders, though, is going to be in my pool. I like pairing him up with Josh Allen a whole lot. This range right here is kind of a dead range for me. Just a lot of guys that aren't jumping off the board. And quite frankly, I'd rather go down to some true value plays. Cole Beasley is good in those Bill stacks. Boyd is good in the Bengals stacks. AJ Green going to see some extra snaps now that Hopkins is out of the way. So I like that. Rashad Bateman, you can still play him. He's seeing a little bit more ownership than he should. Probably coming in closer to 4 or 5% ownership. We'll have to see after this. Because of the news with Marquise Brown, I believe Devin Duvernay might be out as well. So Bateman's going to get even more of a snap load. Randall Cobb, I don't love it, especially because Marcus Valdes-Scantling is back, especially because Devontae Adams is back as well. T.Y. Hilton, I love his upside. So anytime I'm running one of these Buffalo stacks, I like using T.Y. Hilton as a buyback. Obviously, has been hampered by injury to a lot of this year. That's why you see him at $4,300. But he had that really solid game the first game he had back. Obviously, he got injured towards the end of it. Ended up missing a few more games, which the guy's made of glass, unfortunately. Can't stay active. But when he's out there, is extremely productive. I mean, has true 20, 25 point upside. So I like going there a whole lot, especially at just 3.6% ownership. Michael Gallup and Rondo Moore might be my favorite plays on the entire slate. Both of them very good value. Both of them filling in for injured wide receivers. Rondo Moore obviously filling in for Hopkins. Gallup filling in for Amari Cooper. Apologize. Let's keep going further down the board. Mecole Hardman, we talked about a little bit earlier with the Chiefs. I think he's a very sneaky play. He's $4,000. There's not any type of injury to this Chiefs team, but he's still the number 2 wide receiver. A lot of these guys priced ahead of him are being bursted into a wide receiver 2 role. Mecole Hardman has always been that guy. So I like targeting him. I think he's being a little bit underrepresented in terms of his ownership. Quez Watkins is a home run play waiting to happen. I love using him as a result. Marcus Valdes-Scantling, way lower owned than he should be. Again, I like Aaron Rodgers still, even despite the injuries. Marcus Johnson, if you guys saw my value plays video, made that video as somebody who's going to be playing number 2 wide receiver role for this Titans team. You have Julio Jones, who's inactive. Chester Rogers is also going to find himself out there as well. But Marcus Johnson is the clear deep play threat, has a lot of speed, is capable of going out there and scoring a 70, 80-yard touchdown. And that's all it's going to take to pay off that kind of price tag is one of those kind of plays. Speaking of huge play upside, that's what KJ Osborne and Deshaun Jackson both give you. Less than 1.5% ownership on both of them, $3,400 a piece. I think they're great options in terms of flyers. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine, same kind of role. He's also playing for that Titans team. Going to be playing either the number 3 or number 4 wide receiver role. Just a good price tag. Again, could see some garbage time usage as well, especially if they get out to a huge lead over Houston. Cedric Wilson going to be playing the number 3 wide receiver role for Dallas. He's only $3,200. You've seen him have some success in the past in that type of role, so I don't hate going there, especially at sub 1% ownership. And our last value pick is going to be Danny Amendola. He's $3,100. Best matchup on the slate against this Titans team. Has seen quite a good rapport with Tyrod Taylor to this point. And even though Tyrod Taylor has had a few bad weeks since returning from injury, he looked excellent weeks 1 and week 2. So I expect him to return that kind of form at some point. And Danny Amendola would be a direct beneficiary of that kind of production. Let's finish it up here with our tight ends. I guess we'll touch on our defenses too at the end. But let me go ahead and swap over to the tight end projections. Go. All righty. All right, so we have our tight ends. So you can be a little bit quick with the tight end position. Not a ton to talk about here. Travis Kelce, I like using him as a pivot off of the chalky Tyreek Hill. George Kittle, also a very solid option. He was in my core plays video. He saw plenty of production last week, and that was why he's still hampered with a little bit of an injury. Good matchup against this Jacksonville Jaguars team. Also a little bit cheaper than Travis Kelce. Darren Waller, can't go wrong there either. I am trying to fit all 3 of these stud tight ends into my lineups. Obviously not together. Probably can't fit two of them into the same lineup. Using one of them at flex is a little bit too much in terms of opportunity cost. But I like all of them. They're all going to see targets. Definitely all well warranted there. TJ Hawkinson, I still have him as a yes because he's essentially unowned, right? Minuscule ownership right there. Just not the best situation with his quarterback. Guys that I like a lot more. My highest owned tight end on the slate is Dalton Schultz. Love him a ton in this blowout game. Sorry, not blowout, in this shootout against this Chiefs team. Obviously, not dealing with Blake Jarwin stealing any of his targets either, which is going to make his projection even higher in my book. Zach Ertz, solid option. He made my core plays video. Nothing really to say much more than that. He's a solid option. Dawson Knox is going to be in my player pool. Love him a whole lot. Josh Allen is a good stacking option with him. And he's a little bit underpriced, right? He had that very solid start to the year, ended up getting injured. I expect him to return to that kind of production at some point. CJ Azuma, I don't love him as a core play, but I am using him in some of my Bengals stacks. Gerald Everett, I am using with Russell Wilson in some stacks. Also using him as one-off. He's only $3,100. He's extremely athletic. He's one of the best tight ends after the catch. So he's capable of putting up a big game. Same thing with David Njoku, fits that same kind of role. He's extremely cheap at just $2,900. Also extremely athletic, has a huge play in him. So I like targeting those kind of guys. I like Cox. If you wanted to take a flyer, you could go to him. I have him in like one or two lineups, just pure red zone upside. And Mercedes Lewis, I only have in one lineup. It's because of my Aaron Rodgers stacks, right? Got to have a little bit of some of those flyer plays at time to time. So that's the tight end position. Let's go ahead and wrap this up at defense, which is never the most fun position to talk about, but there's definitely some defenses of note this week. Definitely some cash targets that we can look at, particularly the here. Oh, I didn't even have my defenses up. One second. Particularly the Browns defense, right? They're going to be like the smash spot at defense, but I'll hop into it. Here we go. Cool. So defenses. We'll go through this quickly. So Titans at the top. They have a good matchup against the Texans team. They're a little bit higher owned than they should be, but I still have them in my pool. Same thing with the 49ers. Good matchup. Dolphins, very good matchup as well. I have all of them in my pool. Again, 30th, 29th, 31st in terms of their matchups. Exactly what we're looking for. This Browns team, probably the best defense on the slate, though. They are garnering the most ownership, but that's well warranted. I mean, Tim Boyle, God knows how many interceptions he's going to throw. God knows how many times that team's going to fumble today. They're a great option, particularly in cash games. The Saints defense against the Philly, I think they're a little bit underrated. I mean, the Saints are just a good defense in general, but Jalen Hurts has been a dumpster fire at times. He's looked polished at times, but he's also been really bad versus some very bad defenses. And now that he's facing a stout defense, could really go the other way. Same thing with the Eagles side. I mean, Trevor Simeon is no Peyton Manning or anything like that. They've also been a little bit underrated to this point of the year. So I like going into that game. I think this game's going to be low scoring. I'm targeting almost nobody from that game. Let me see how much of that game I even have ownership to. So I have 0% ownership to that game, 0% exposure. So if that tells you anything about what I expect there, that's why I'm targeting both defenses. I think that they could both be relatively high scoring there for sure. Let's go a little bit further down the board. Panthers defense is chalky. I don't really understand it. I mean, Washington's been a lot better on offense than people want to give them credit for. I definitely think Cowboys being low owned makes a lot of sense. You don't want to target them against the Chiefs and vice versa. I think the Chiefs defense is not somebody to target. Let's go a little bit further down the board. Seahawks defense against Arizona. They're also going to be a little bit higher owned than they should be. Colt McCoy is not a bad backup quarterback. They were very productive in that first game together. I mean, James Conner had nearly 40 fantasy points. Actually, I believe he had over 40 fantasy points. So they definitely could rebound there. I don't think they're as much of the smash play as people think. Washington football team, on the other hand, with Cam Newton returning to the lineup with PJ Walker at quarterback, that could go wrong in a big way. And while I'm still high on them, I still have them in my lineups. I'm not blind to the fact that they could really struggle out there, particularly with him learning the plays and having that starting role for the first time. So I think playing the Washington football team defense isn't the worst idea. The Jets have the best pass defense in the NFL per the numbers. So I think the fact that they're $2,300 against a quarterback that, quite frankly, has looked horrible this year in Tua, I think is a great opportunity. They're also relatively underowned. And this whole Tua thing this week where everyone thinks he's going to go off, I do not understand, like, at all. Seriously, I do not understand what type of numbers they're looking at that would make them like Tua Tagovailoa. I mean, he's had a couple all right games, but I guess we're forgetting the first like 4 or 5 weeks of the season where he was literal dog shit. You can't ignore those numbers when you're doing your analysis. People are scoreboard watching, taking a look at the last 2-3 performances, and that sure he had a good stretch, but that's his ceiling. That's the ceiling for Tua Tagovailoa. He's not going to improve from there. At least not this season. Right? He's just too young. He doesn't have the best offensive line. He doesn't have the best offensive scheme. It's a lot of problems that aren't his fault. Jaguars defense, I like going to. San Francisco has been, obviously they're without their star running back. They're going to be relying on Jeff Wilson Jr. They've also been dealing with Jimmy Garoppolo, a quarterback who's been extremely inconsistent. So who knows how good that offense ends up being. And the last defense I'll target is the Lions defense. If they're going to have any chance at winning this game or even keeping it remotely competitive, they're going to need a defensive touchdown, maybe two. So I'm buying in on it. It's $2,100. You have to take one of these flyers down low. Opens up a lot more possibilities with the rest of your lineup positions. And if I'm taking a complete flyer, it's going to be the Lions side of things. But that's all we've got here for the live stream, guys. Thank you to everybody that stopped by and whatnot. We're going to be doing this again next week at the same time, 11:30 a.m. Eastern time. Because we don't have golf next week, going to be a little bit more focused on the football side of things. So going to have content coming out a little bit earlier than what we had this week. Also some extra shows. We're going to do a week 11 review show. We're going to do an ownership show. A few other things that I haven't put into the production works yet, but some extra football content. So we're going to go ahead and try out some new formats for videos. So if you guys like any of the new formats that you see on the channel this week, go ahead and let me know down in the comments. That way I know to continue them into the future. But good luck with all of your lineups this week. If you guys are watching this on replay, you can go ahead and put any of your questions down in the chat. I'll get to them whenever I see them on the side. But again, good luck with your lineups. In general, if we're talking about our top 3 plays, I'll go ahead and leave you with Justin Jefferson, completely too unowned. He's, again, a lot of it comes down to the price tag, but I think he's going to have a massive game. In terms of value, I think A.J. Dillon is just a clear smash play, especially in terms of the cash side of things. And in terms of value, Rondale Moore, Michael Gallup, and we'll leave it there. Those are my favorite plays. So, again, good luck and peace, guys.